Commander Sarah Chen stared at the holographic display floating above her command console, her coffee growing cold as the impossible data streams continued to flow across the screen. The Deep Space Monitoring Station Lighthouse 7 had been her home for 3 years, positioned at the edge of human space to watch for threats that might emerge from the void. In all that time, she had never seen anything like this. The signal had arrived 47 minutes ago, a burst transmission that should have been impossible to detect at their current distance from its origin point. The quantum encryption was unlike anything in human databases, yet somehow their computers had managed to decode portions of it. What they found made Sarah's blood run cold. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from his station, his usually steady hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his headset. "Commander, I've run the analysis 3 times. The signal originated from the Kepler 442 system, approximately 1,200 light-years from our position. But according to our records, that system was supposed to be uninhabited." Sarah nodded grimly. She knew the records well. Kepler 442 had been one of the first systems humanity had planned to colonize after developing faster-than-light travel. The advanced scout ships had departed Earth nearly 2 centuries ago, carrying 10,000 volunteers eager to establish humanity's first foothold beyond the solar system. Then, silence. Complete and total silence that had lasted for over 150 years. "What exactly does the message say?" Sarah asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would change everything. Rodriguez's voice cracked as he read from his screen. "It's a distress signal, ma'am. Multiple languages, including standard Earth English. The translation reads, 'This is Colony Ship Endeavor, seeking immediate assistance. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Our defenses are failing. Please send help. Humanity must survive.' This transmission repeats on all frequencies." The command center fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Sarah felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The Endeavor had been the flagship of the colonization fleet, carrying the brightest minds and most advanced technology humanity had ever created. If they were calling for help after all these years, something terrible had found them in the darkness between the stars. "Ma'am," Rodriguez continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something else. The signal is being broadcast on quantum frequencies that shouldn't exist yet. According to our physics models, the technology required to generate this type of transmission won't be developed for another 50 years. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Either the colonists had made incredible technological advances during their isolation, or something else entirely was happening in the Kepler 442 system. Neither possibility filled her with confidence. She activated her command console and opened a priority channel to Earth. The message would take hours to reach the homeworld, but Earth Command needed to know immediately. As she composed her report, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. If the Endeavor had managed to develop quantum broadcasting technology, what kind of threat could possibly overwhelm their defenses? The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah's team worked frantically to extract every piece of information they could from the signal. What they discovered painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The transmission included fragmented data logs that spoke of first contact with an alien species, initial peaceful exchanges, and then sudden, devastating attacks that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The aliens, referred to only as the Harvesters in the incomplete logs, appeared to be interested in something specific about human colonies. They didn't simply destroy everything they encountered. Instead, they seemed to be collecting something, taking entire populations and leaving behind only empty settlements and strange energy signatures that defied explanation. As Sarah read through the decoded fragments, a chill ran down her spine. The logs indicated that the Harvesters had already moved beyond Kepler 442. They were spreading through human space, systematically locating and attacking every colony they could find. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to be moving toward Earth. Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's xenobiologist, looked up from his analysis with haunted eyes. "Commander, based on these energy signatures and the tactical reports, I don't think we're dealing with a conventional alien species. The technology described here operates on principles that violate several fundamental laws of physics. They're not just advanced, they're operating under completely different scientific rules." Sarah absorbed this information while simultaneously coordinating with her communications team to boost their signal strength. If the harvesters were real and heading toward human space, every colony and outpost needed to be warned immediately. But even as she worked, doubt gnawed at her mind. Why had it taken so long for this signal to reach them? And why now, after more than a century of silence? The answer came from an unexpected source. Ensign Park, a young analyst who had been quietly working on signal trajectory calculations, suddenly stood up from her station with excitement and terror warring on her face. "Commander," Park said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal, "I've been tracking the signal's path and cross-referencing it with our deep space sensor network. The transmission didn't originate from Kepler 442 yesterday. Based on quantum decay patterns and relativistic effects, this signal has been traveling for over 90 years. Whatever happened to the Endeavour, it happened nearly a century ago." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the signal was 90 years old, then the harvesters had been active in human space for decades. Every colony that had gone silent, every exploration ship that had simply vanished without a trace, every mysterious equipment failure and unexplained disappearance suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. Sarah's hands moved across her console with practiced efficiency, calling up files and records that she had reviewed thousands of times during her career. Colony ships that had reported successful arrivals and then fell silent. Research stations that had transmitted routine updates until one day they simply stopped. Merchant vessels that had disappeared along well-established trade routes. The pattern was there, hidden in plain sight for anyone willing to look. Humanity hadn't been alone in the galaxy for over a century. They had been hunted, systematically and patiently, by an enemy so far beyond human understanding that their attacks had been dismissed as accidents and equipment failures. "Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just realized the fate of human civilization might depend on the next few decisions. "I want you to compile every disappearance, every lost colony, every unexplained silence from the past 90 years. Cross-reference everything with the energy signatures from the Endeavour logs." "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied, already pulling up the relevant databases. As her team worked, Sarah opened another priority channel, this one directed toward the Sol Defense Network. If her suspicions were correct, Earth's military forces needed to be placed on high alert immediately. The harvesters might have been patient, but 90 years was more than enough time to scout human defenses and plan a final assault. The next update from Park confirmed Sarah's worst fears. "Commander, I've detected similar quantum signatures in 17 different sectors where we've lost contact with colonies or outposts. The signatures are getting stronger and more recent as they approach our core systems." Sarah stood up from her command chair and walked to the main display, where a three-dimensional map of human space rotated slowly. Red markers indicated lost colonies and disappeared ships. When viewed together, they formed a clear pattern, a spiral that began at humanity's furthest outposts and slowly converged on Earth itself. "They've been hurting us," Sarah said quietly, the realization hitting her with terrible clarity. "Every lost colony, every disappeared ship, it wasn't random. They've been pushing us back, concentrating us in the core systems." Dr. Webb looked up from his analysis, his face pale. "Commander, if that's true, then we're not dealing with a simple invasion. This is extermination by design. They've spent 90 years learning about us, studying our responses, mapping our defenses. Whatever they're planning, they've had nearly a century to perfect it." Sarah nodded grimly. The harvesters weren't just technologically superior, they were patient beyond human comprehension. They had turned humanity's expansion into the galaxy into an elaborate trap, allowing human colonies to spread out just far enough before systematically eliminating them and driving the survivors back toward Earth. As the hours passed and more data was analyzed, the full scope of the threat became clear. The harvesters had infiltrated human space so thoroughly that they probably knew more about human capabilities than humans did themselves. Every military installation, every defensive position, every escape route had been observed and catalogued. But there was something else in the data that gave Sarah hope. The Endeavor's logs included references to successful defensive actions, moments when human ingenuity and determination had actually driven off harvester attacks. The aliens might be technologically superior, but they weren't invincible. Sarah activated the emergency broadcast system and prepared to send a message that would change human civilization forever. Earth Command needed to know that humanity was not alone in the galaxy, and that they were facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever imagined. As she began to dictate her report, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. The harvesters had spent 90 years preparing for this moment. But humanity had something the aliens might not understand: the ability to adapt, to fight against impossible odds, and to find hope even in the darkest circumstances. The distress signal from the Endeavor had awakened more than just awareness of an alien threat. It had awakened humanity's understanding that they were part of something much larger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Now, the question was whether that awakening had come in time to save the human race from extinction. Admiral Rebecca Morrison stood in the war room beneath Luna Command, surrounded by holographic displays showing every human military asset in known space. 48 hours had passed since Commander Chen's transmission from Lighthouse 7, and those 48 hours had transformed human civilization from a peaceful, expanding society into a species preparing for total war. The evidence was overwhelming. Once they knew what to look for, the pattern became impossible to ignore. 90 years of systematic elimination, 90 years of being herded like cattle toward a final slaughter. But if the harvesters expected humanity to simply wait for death, they had seriously underestimated their prey. "Status report," Morrison commanded, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the command center. General Hassan stepped forward, his weathered face grim but determined. "All military forces have been placed on maximum alert. We've recalled every ship, every patrol, every deep space mission. The home fleet now numbers over 8,000 vessels, from dreadnoughts down to reconnaissance fighters." Morrison nodded, studying the tactical display. It was an impressive force by human standards. But she had no illusions about what they were facing. The harvesters had spent nearly a century studying human military capabilities. They would know exactly what to expect. "What about civilian evacuations?" Morrison asked. Colonel Martinez, head of colonial operations, consulted her tablet. "We're proceeding with emergency relocations from outer colonies to core systems. So far, we've moved approximately 2 million civilians, but the logistics are staggering. Many colonies are refusing to evacuate, claiming they'd rather fight than abandon their homes." Morrison understood the sentiment, but she also understood tactical reality. Scattered colonies were impossible to defend against an enemy with the harvesters' capabilities. Consolidating the civilian population in heavily defended core systems was their only hope of protecting them during the coming conflict. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, Earth's leading xenobiologist and quantum physicist, stepped up to the central display. She had been working non-stop since Chen's transmission arrived, analyzing every piece of data they had gathered about the harvesters. "Admiral," Carter began. I've made some disturbing discoveries about our enemy. Based on the energy signatures and tactical reports from the Endeavor, the Harvesters don't just possess superior technology, they appear to exist partially outside normal space-time. Morrison frowned. Explain. Carter manipulated the holographic display, showing complex mathematical models and energy patterns. The quantum signatures indicate that Harvester ships can phase in and out of our dimensional plane. This explains how they've been able to attack colonies and disappear without a trace. Our sensors simply can't detect them when they're not fully materialized in our reality. The implications were staggering. If the Harvesters could attack from outside normal space-time, conventional defenses would be useless. Human ships would be fighting ghosts that could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish before any counterattack could be mounted. However, Carter continued, there's a weakness in their approach. The energy required to phase between dimensions is enormous. Based on the data, they can only maintain partial materialization for limited periods. If we can force them to remain in our dimensional plane, they become vulnerable to conventional weapons. Morrison leaned forward. How do we force them to stay materialized? Quantum disruption fields, Carter replied. If we can generate enough quantum interference, we can prevent them from phasing out of our reality. The technology exists, but we've never built it on the scale required for fleet operations. General Hassan studied the technical specifications Carter had provided. How long would it take to retrofit our ships with this technology? Under normal circumstances, years. But if we mobilize every shipyard, every research facility, every available resource, we might be able to equip the home fleet in 60 days. Morrison made the decision immediately. Do it. Whatever resources you need, whatever personnel, whatever materials, you'll have them. 60 days may be all the time we have. As Carter departed to begin the massive retrofit operation, Morrison turned her attention to intelligence reports. The news was not encouraging. Deep space monitoring stations had detected massive energy disturbances in several outer systems, consistent with large-scale harvester operations. Whatever the aliens had been planning for 90 years, it was beginning. Commander Yuki Tanaka, head of Naval Intelligence, approached with a grim expression. Admiral, we've lost contact with the Tau Ceti colony. Their last transmission was a distress signal indicating massive unknown contacts approaching their system. Morrison added another red marker to the tactical display. Tau Ceti had been home to nearly 3 million humans. If the colony had fallen, it meant the Harvesters were accelerating their timeline. There's more, Tanaka continued. We've detected similar energy disturbances approaching 7 other outer colonies. Based on current trajectory calculations, they're all converging on the core systems. Morrison studied the display, watching as computer projections showed potential Harvester movements. The enemy was closing in from all directions, preparing for a coordinated assault that would overwhelm human defenses through sheer scope and scale. Estimated time until they reach the core systems? 60 to 90 days, depending on their actual capabilities. Morrison felt a cold smile cross her lips. 60 days to retrofit the fleet. 60 to 90 days until the Harvesters arrived. It would be close, perhaps impossibly close, but humanity would be ready. Over the following weeks, human civilization transformed itself with incredible speed. Every shipyard in the solar system worked around the clock, installing quantum disruption generators on military vessels. Civilian industrial capacity was completely converted to military production. Scientists and engineers worked in shifts around the clock, solving technical problems that should have taken years to resolve. But the most remarkable transformation was in humanity itself. The knowledge that they faced extinction had awakened something primal and powerful in the human psyche. Colony militias, trained with deadly determination. Civilian volunteers flooded military recruitment centers. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries at an unprecedented pace, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the end of their species. Morrison received daily reports on the retrofit progress, watching with growing satisfaction as more ships completed their modifications. The quantum disruption technology was working better than expected, with some vessels achieving disruption fields powerful enough to prevent harvester phase transitions across several cubic kilometers of space. Meanwhile, refugees from the outer colonies continued to arrive in the core systems, bringing with them first-hand accounts of harvester attacks. The stories were consistent and terrifying. Ships that appeared without warning, weapons that seemed to ignore conventional shielding, and attackers that vanished before defenders could respond. But there were also stories of successful resistance. On Kepler 186b, colonial militia had managed to drive off a harvester scouting force using improvised quantum disruption mines. On Wolf 359, a merchant vessel had successfully detected and engaged a phased harvester ship using modified sensor arrays. Morrison analyzed every report, looking for patterns and weaknesses in harvester tactics. What she discovered gave her hope. The aliens were powerful, but they were also methodical and predictable. They had spent so long observing humanity that they had become locked into specific tactical approaches. "They're fighting the last war," Morrison told her staff during a strategy briefing. "They've spent 90 years studying human military doctrine from the colonial expansion period. They know how we fought then, but they don't know how we're going to fight now." General Hassan nodded. "Our simulations suggest that quantum disruption fields will force them to engage us on relatively equal terms. If we can deny them the advantage of dimensional phase tactics, human numerical superiority becomes a significant factor." Morrison wasn't entirely convinced that numerical superiority would be enough, but it was a start. More importantly, the quantum disruption technology had given human military planners ideas for new tactical approaches that the harvesters couldn't have observed or prepared for. The first test of these new tactics came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected a massive harvester force approaching the Alpha Centauri system, where nearly 10 million humans lived and worked. Morrison ordered the Third Fleet to intercept, knowing that this engagement would determine whether humanity's new defensive strategy would succeed or fail. Admiral Chen Wei, commanding the Third Fleet, reported in as his ships moved into position around Alpha Centauri. "Quantum disruption generators are online. All ships report ready for combat operations." Morrison watched the tactical display as 50 human vessels arranged themselves in a defensive formation around the star system. Against them came something that defied easy description: energy signatures that flickered in and out of sensor range, ships that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Contact with harvester forces in 30 seconds, Chen reported. "Activating quantum disruption fields now." On the tactical display, Morrison watched as waves of quantum interference spread out from the human fleet. Suddenly, the flickering harvester signatures solidified into definite contacts. For the first time in 90 years, humanity could see their enemy clearly. The harvester ships were beautiful and terrible, sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around themselves. But they were also vulnerable. Denied their dimensional phase capabilities, they were forced to engage the human fleet directly. What followed was unlike any battle in human history. Harvester weapons were indeed powerful, capable of penetrating conventional shielding with ease. But human ships, fighting with the desperation of a species facing extinction, proved remarkably resilient. More importantly, human tactics had evolved far beyond anything the harvesters had observed during their long surveillance. "They're not adapting," Chen reported, excitement growing in his voice. "They're using the same attack patterns over and over, even though we're countering them effectively." Morrison realized that the harvesters' greatest strength had become a weakness. They had spent so long observing and planning that they had lost the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected situations. Human unpredictability, always considered a flaw by military planners, had become their greatest asset. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the human fleet had lost 12 ships, but the Harvester force had been completely destroyed. More importantly, they had captured intact Harvester technology and, for the first time, prisoners. The interrogation of the captured Harvesters revealed information that changed everything. The aliens were not a unified species, but rather the automated servants of something far more ancient and terrible. The true enemy was still out there, watching and waiting, but humanity had just proven that their servants were not invincible. Morrison stood in the war room looking at reports from across human space. Other Harvester forces had been engaged and defeated. The quantum disruption technology was working, and human forces were adapting faster than their enemies could compensate. But she knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when the ancient masters of the Harvesters finally decided to take direct action. Humanity had awakened to the threat, had fought back successfully, but the greatest challenges still lay ahead. Captain Alex Rivera stood on the bridge of the flagship Endeavour II, watching through the main viewport as the largest fleet in human history prepared for what might be the final battle of their species. 6 months had passed since the first Harvester attacks. 6 months of continuous warfare across dozens of star systems. Humanity had learned to fight their dimensional enemies, but now they faced something far worse. The captured Harvester prisoners had revealed the truth through painful interrogation sessions that pushed the limits of human ethics. The Harvesters were merely tools, created by an ancient species called the Architects, who viewed younger civilizations as nothing more than raw materials for their incomprehensible projects. For millions of years, the Architects had seeded the galaxy with their servants, systematically harvesting promising species when they reached sufficient technological development. But humanity had done something unexpected. They had fought back successfully, adapting and evolving their tactics faster than any species the Architects had encountered in their long history. This success had attracted the attention of the Architects themselves, who were now coming to personally oversee humanity's destruction. Rivera adjusted his uniform and activated the fleet-wide communication system. Around him, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces reflecting the same mixture of determination and fear that he felt. Today would decide whether humanity survived to see another generation or joined the countless extinct civilizations that had fallen to the Architects. "All ships, this is Admiral Rivera," he began, using the rank he had earned through 6 months of desperate warfare. "Long-range sensors have confirmed that the Architect fleet is approaching the Sol system. Estimated arrival, 14 hours. Rivera paused, looking out at the massive assembly of human vessels. The home fleet now numbered over 12,000 ships, from massive dreadnoughts bristling with quantum disruption weapons to small fighters crewed by volunteers who had never seen space combat before the war began. Every ship humanity could build, repair, or salvage had been pressed into service for this final confrontation. For 6 months, we have fought the servants of our enemy. We have learned their weaknesses, adapted our tactics, and proven that humanity cannot be easily destroyed. Today, we face the masters themselves. Today, we discover whether the human spirit is stronger than ancient malevolence." Rivera closed the communication channel and turned to his tactical officer, Commander Sarah Chen, who had been promoted from her monitoring station position after demonstrating exceptional skill in analyzing enemy patterns. "Status report on the Architect fleet?" Rivera asked. Chen consulted her displays, her expression grim. 17 massive vessels, each approximately 50 kilometers in length. Energy signatures unlike anything we've encountered. The quantum disruption fields that worked against the Harvesters appear to have minimal effect on their technology. Rivera absorbed this information without visible reaction, though privately he felt the cold touch of despair. if their proven anti-harvester weapons were ineffective against the architects, humanity would need to find entirely new ways to fight. Dr. Elizabeth Carter approached from the science station, carrying a tablet filled with complex calculations. She had spent the past month analyzing every piece of captured architect technology, searching for weaknesses that human forces could exploit. "Admiral," Carter said, "I've made a discovery that might change our tactical approach. The architect ships operate using something I can only describe as reality manipulation technology. They don't just exist in multiple dimensions. They actively reshape local space-time to their advantage." Rivera frowned. "What does that mean for our battle plan?" "It means that conventional tactics are useless. Their ships can alter the laws of physics in their immediate vicinity. Energy weapons might simply cease to function. Projectiles could change direction mid-flight. Even our quantum disruption technology could be neutralized." Rivera felt the last of his confidence beginning to drain away. If the architects could literally rewrite the rules of reality, how could humanity possibly fight them? "However," Carter continued, "there's something else. The reality manipulation requires enormous energy and computational resources. Based on the data we've gathered, they can only maintain localized reality distortions for limited periods. If we can overwhelm their processing capacity, force them to maintain too many reality alterations simultaneously, their systems should become unstable." Rivera seized on this possibility like a drowning man grabbing a rope. "How do we overwhelm their processing capacity?" "Chaos," Carter replied simply. "The architects have spent millions of years perfecting order, control, predictability. They reshape reality by imposing their will on the universe through precise calculations and overwhelming power. But chaos is mathematically impossible to control completely. If we can introduce enough random variables, enough unpredictable elements, their reality manipulation systems should start to fail." Rivera immediately understood the implications. Human unpredictability, their tendency toward chaotic and irrational behavior, might be their greatest weapon against an enemy that operated through perfect order and control. Over the next several hours, Rivera and his staff developed what might have been the strangest battle plan in military history. Instead of organized formations and coordinated tactics, they would deliberately embrace chaos. Ships would operate independently, making decisions based on local conditions rather than fleet-wide commands. Fighter pilots would be encouraged to act on instinct rather than training. Every captain would be given broad authority to improvise and adapt as situations developed. The plan violated every principle of military doctrine that humanity had developed over thousands of years of warfare. It was insane, chaotic, and completely unpredictable, which made it perfect for fighting an enemy that expected order and control. As the architect fleet entered the outer solar system, Rivera gave his final address to the human fleet. "Remember, we are not fighting for victory in the conventional sense. We are fighting to be human. We are fighting to preserve the right to be chaotic, unpredictable, and gloriously irrational. Today, our greatest weaknesses become our greatest strengths. The architect vessels appeared on long-range sensors like falling stars, massive constructs that seemed to bend space around themselves. As they approached, reality itself began to fluctuate. Stars dimmed and brightened randomly. Gravity wells shifted without explanation. The laws of physics became suggestions rather than rules. Rivera ordered the fleet to advance, and what followed defied every principle of space combat that had ever been developed. Human ships scattered in all directions, each captain interpreting their orders differently. Some ships formed impromptu wolf packs, others operated entirely alone. Fighter squadrons split apart and reformed randomly, following no discernible tactical doctrine. The architects responded as expected, attempting to impose order on the chaos through reality manipulation. Space around their ships became stable zones, where physics operated according to their design. But maintaining these zones, while under attack from thousands of unpredictable human vessels, strained their systems beyond their limits. Captain Maria Santos, commanding the destroyer Defiant, demonstrated the new tactics perfectly. When an architect vessel attempted to neutralize her ship's weapons using reality manipulation, she responded by ramming the enemy at maximum speed while simultaneously jettisoning her cargo bay full of quantum disruption mines. The completely irrational action overloaded the architect's processing systems, creating a brief window where conventional weapons became effective again. Across the battle zone, similar scenes played out hundreds of times. Human crews abandoned standard procedures and relied on desperation, creativity, and pure human stubbornness. They used cargo containers as weapons, turned life support systems into improvised bombs, and flew damaged ships directly into enemy vessels when their weapons failed. The architects, for all their technological superiority, had no response to this level of chaotic unpredictability. Their reality manipulation systems, designed to impose order on the universe, simply could not process the sheer randomness of human tactical behavior. Rivera watched the battle unfold from the bridge of Endeavor 2, amazed by what he was seeing. Human ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting with jury-rigged systems and impossible determination. Crews that should have surrendered instead found new ways to damage the enemy even as their own vessels fell apart around them. The turning point came when Lieutenant Commander Jackson, commanding the frigate Indomitable, made a decision that violated every principle of physics and common sense. Faced with an architect vessel that had neutralized his weapons and engines, he ordered his crew to overload their quantum disruption generator while simultaneously activating their faster-than-light drive. The resulting explosion should have destroyed everything within 1,000 kilometers. Instead, the interaction between the quantum disruption field and the FTL drive created a localized reality cascade that spread to the nearby architect vessel. For 17 seconds, the laws of physics simply ceased to function in that region of space. When reality reasserted itself, both the Indomitable and the architect vessel were gone, but the cascade effect had damaged the reality manipulation systems of the entire architect fleet. Suddenly, their vessels were vulnerable to conventional weapons. Rivera seized the opportunity immediately. All ships, concentrate fire on the nearest architect vessel. Standard tactics, maximum aggression. The human fleet converged on the damaged architect ships with devastating effect. Without their reality manipulation capabilities, the ancient vessels proved to be vulnerable to sustained bombardment from quantum disruption weapons. One by one, the massive ships began to fall. The battle lasted 36 hours, the longest continuous space engagement in human history. When it ended, the Sol system was filled with debris from both fleets, but the architect threat had been eliminated. Of the 17 enemy vessels, none survived. The human fleet had lost over 8,000 ships, but humanity itself had survived. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and damage assessment teams cataloged the destruction, Rivera found himself thinking about the distress signal that had started it all. Commander Chen's discovery at Lighthouse 7 had awakened humanity to a threat they never knew existed, but it had also awakened something else: the realization that human chaos, unpredictability, and refusal to accept defeat were not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be celebrated. The galaxy was vast and filled with unknown dangers, but humanity had proven that they could face those dangers and survive. They had fought ancient powers and emerged victorious, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. As Rivera stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship, watching the sun shine on a solar system that remained free, he knew that this victory was just the beginning. There would be other threats, other challenges, other enemies who underestimated the power of human determination. but humanity would be ready for them, awakened now to their true potential and united in their refusal to bow to any force that sought to extinguish the light of human civilization. The distress signal from the lost colony ship Endeavour had indeed awakened humanity's relentless fleet, but more than that, it had awakened the relentless spirit that would carry them to the stars and beyond, no matter what waited for them in the darkness between worlds.